Okay, with that, we will now be convening to the special joint meeting of the Orange County Great Park Board and the City Council. For the record, I asked the City Clerk to note that all members of the Great Park Board members and the City Council members are present, excluding one board member and the council member, Lynn Schott. So that should be properly noted. And the agenda item 2.1 will be considered by both the Orange County Great Park Board and the City Council. I would like to request that the Great Park Board Chairperson Christina Shea proceed with the agenda item 2.1, which will require board recommendation to the City Council. So I now turn it to this gavel to Christina Shea, Board Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, we will now consider our agenda item 2.1 for the Great Park Board, and I will turn to Sean Joyce, our City Manager, who will be introducing the item for us this evening.
Thank you. There is an item on the agenda with respect to legal services incurred related to or ancillary to the audit, the recently completed audit, and actions subsequent to that audit, both before and after that March 24th, 2015 date. It is presented to you for your consideration with recommendations, definitive recommendations for 2 items and a consideration of item number 3. The item is on the agenda, and it's admittedly unusual, notwithstanding a new law, Measure V, adopted by overwhelming support of the voters of Irvine, and therefore it is procedurally applicable that it be and appropriate that it be considered by the City Council. If you have any follow-up questions concerning the request for approval, Anthony Taylor is here and happy to answer any questions. Procedurally, staff, of course, is happy to answer any questions that you have concerning this item. Again, it is not ordinary. It's just new pursuant to provision 4C, maybe 4A, B, and C, but most directly Section 4C of the provisions of Measure V. And so I present it to you for your consideration, again, with firm recommendations on items 1 and 2 and consideration of item 3.
Thank you very much, City Manager. And the recommendations are from staff, is that correct?
They are indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do any directors have comments or questions at this time? Yes, Director Crum.
Thank you very much. So do I understand that there's a request for an additional $80,000? Is that what's being requested?
Yes, it's from work from March 24th through today. Or I'm sorry, going through the deposition of, do you want to share that with us, Sean?
I'd be happy to. It is presented to you as additional funding, I would say, and would want to make clear, at your meeting of March 24th, at which time you considered recommendation, you made a motion, passed a motion concerning next steps, and it happens from time to time. You approved those steps, but at that time you were not asked, nor did you make an appropriation for those procedural next steps. This corresponds with the action you approved on that date, among other requests for funding.
So let me ask then, why wasn't a request for appropriation made at the time that the additional work was recommended? I didn't support it, but why was a request for funding not made at that time?
It was a report that was a very comprehensive report and follow-up, and I would dare say, speaking for Special Legal Counsel at that time was probably more focused on the next steps, concluding a lengthy, comprehensive report, and returned at a later date with a sense of what those expenses would be.
Well, let me just say, I mean, I'm a little challenged by this. You know, this process has been going on for quite a long time. 2 additional contracts beyond the original contracts one for $10,575 for a peer review in 2014, and then an additional $10,000 just recently for Aleshire and Wynder to represent the city in opposing the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. I raised that because I asked the city manager, when I became aware that Aleshire and Wynder was doing that and that our lobbyists were also doing that, who had directed them to take that action. It certainly was not brought before the council. He indicated that he had, under his own sense of what local control is. But so you know, there's money that was moved forward. Originally, you know, this was supposed to be a $250,000 audit. It was raised on numerous occasions. An additional $400,000 in January of 2014, an additional $333,000 in July of 2014, an additional $240,000 budget adjustment in December of 14, with $180,000 of that given to Aleshire and Wynder, and of the $333,000, an additional $225,000 to Aleshire and Wynder. And I recall that in December, shortly after being sworn in, Councilmember Schott was presented with the request, as we all were, for the additional nearly $250,000, and she asked if that was going to be sufficient to complete the audit, and was told that it was. Now, what I'm seeing here is that at least $28,000, and probably more, is for costs incurred prior to March 24th, 2015. So prior to this request for additional services, there was $28,000, and then there's an estimated additional fees. I don't know what that refers to, whether that becomes a before the 24th of 2015, March 24th of 2015, or an after. But it's just, to me, a little hard when this audit, this so-called audit, which was then clearly stated by both Aleshire and Wynder and HSNO, the so-called audit firm, that it was not an audit, that we have this constant increasing of costs associated with this under sole source contracts, under the city manager's $100,000 authority. We have work done before money has been authorized, and all of these are things that were charged by those on this city council who have so aggressively pushed the audit forward. So, you know, this may seem at this point, after nearly $1.5 million, $80,000 may seem like small potatoes, you know, as far as the action today. But we also heard, as the item was reported out from closed session, that the city manager has been asked now, not out of Fund 180, but out of our city general fund, to expend money to get yet more legal services for other projects that may be moving forward. And so it just seems hypocritical to me that when you launch a 2.5-year, what I regard as a taxpayer-funded political witch hunt at the expense of more than $1.5 million, and all we keep doing is throwing more money at it, when out of this effort, not one penny was unaccounted for. Nothing.
Councilmember Director Crum, you're going off point. I'm not going to allow you to go back to your historical discussion about why you don't like the audit, about why you feel it was justified that $250 million were spent, and it was okay. You're not going to be able to do that. Your time is up. If you could conclude, I would appreciate it.
Well, I'm not going to support this evening. I think if people wanted money spent out of the city's funding for this, it should have been stated publicly at the time that they recommended the additional work, and I'm troubled that some of the work we're paying for was not even directed by the full council. There has been far too much secrecy about this entire process. I will not be supporting this item this evening.
Okay, I appreciate your comments. You certainly have a right to your opinion. I do want to state that when our contractors went to Sacramento to request that the state audit committee audit our city, You aggressively sent a very long letter supporting and asking that committee to investigate our city and our subcommittee, which would have cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So I just very pleased that the subcommittee, through the Senate side of the vote, did not allow that to go forward. It was completely inappropriate that a disgruntled business go up to the state audit committee and want them to audit our city, and you supported it and sent a letter working against your own city that you've been elected to represent. So I'm sorry, I'm getting a cold. I did want to call up Anthony Taylor. If you wanted to come up and just explain the additional fee that was part of the audit. On the other hand, the other expenses are post-audit expenses after the audit, and we are going to be spending more money as we move forward. We allocated money tonight to move forward to hire a very experienced litigator to support us in remedies and for recovery, to get money back from those individuals that we believe created some very serious problems as we came through this audit process. So, Anthony, can you just answer the question for Director Crum just in regard to those specific issues from March 24th?
Yes, Chairperson Shea, and thank you, members of the Great Park Board, for having me here in front of you. I just wanted the record to be clear. I am here as a member of the public. The reason I have recused myself from the dais is because on this agenda is also an amendment to our contract, and that's why I'm coming to you as a member of the public, as somebody that's discussing that and just answering questions. To respond to the questions that have been asked, some of these fees, and essentially what we've done is we've broken these down into two categories from the authorization the council gave in March. The first is the order to show cause petition, essentially a motion to compel petition against former council member and mayor Larry Agron. Of that, only $2,000 was incurred prior to the council approval. The reason it was incurred prior to council approval is because we needed time to prepare the staff report and the presentation materials that were before you. There is no law firm or anyone that could possibly present the item to you in compliance with the Brown Act without incurring fees to present the actual materials and the quality of the staff report that the council was acting on. So that's why those fees were incurred before the actual approval. There was an additional, on the closed session recovery effort, there were some fees that were occurred prior to the March approval. Those were not related to actually preparing the audit report. Those were incurred in terms of assessing the city's claims and preparing the preliminary analysis that was required for the closed session discussions. We've now had 3 closed session discussions. I won't go into those because that would be inappropriate, but there was preliminary work that was necessary for that. That is authorized as a matter of law in terms of attorneys. Attorneys were governed by the Business and Professions Code, and Section 6148D of the Business and Professions Code actually mandates that attorneys take on preliminary work for clients to make sure the client's rights and interests are protected. And that's all we did here. Everything is in compliance with the law. You have in front of you your city manager and city attorney if you have any legal questions or other procedural questions.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I appreciate your response, and I'll turn now to Director Lalloway, and then I will turn to Director Choi.
Thank you, Chair Shea. I have no issue with making sure that our attorneys get paid what they've been authorized to do and reasonably necessary for their position. I have no problem with that. They should be. But I have difficulty getting to the bottom of what's being asked for here specifically. I've not seen any bills, so I mean, I can't approve specific amounts. I'm supposed to approve numbers without seeing the bills, and I'm not comfortable doing that. I'm happy to authorize the city manager and his staff to go through the bills and engage in discussion with Anthony about the bills and pay what we've authorized. Absolutely, if we've authorized that work, he should be paid. I have no problem with that. I just don't know what I'm being asked to do. It's $80,000, but I don't know what it's for, and I don't. Maybe I should ask.
Let's turn to the city manager.
Well,
I would assume we have bills that have been submitted.
Perhaps I can ask my question to the city manager. Have specific bills been submitted?
Bills for this additional work effort approved on March 24th have not yet been received.
Okay, so we've not seen the bills yet. Chair Shea, I just feel uncomfortable approving an allocation. I'm okay with one, recommended action one, this is for the board, an amount deemed appropriate by our staff, and we obviously authorize them to go and prepare and negotiate tolling agreements, and a contract amendment increasing the project scope to encompass the new effort. That's important too. I just can't approve at this point specific dollar amounts. I don't know how, City Manager, if you have a suggestion about this, but I'm okay with having Sean and his staff look at everything and making sure they're appropriate for what we're doing, because I just haven't seen your bills, and I just can't authorize a specific amount. Do you have a suggestion at all?
I think that'd be great. I mean, the bills are being prepared. We're happy to review them. We review them very thoroughly in any case. We were particularly sensitive in light of Measure V that went through, and we want to make sure we're compliant with it. I think the public disclosure tonight helps us ensure that we're meeting the intent of that measure, as I know that you authored it. And
As
was
writing
approved.
it, yes, that was my intent.
And so if you're comfortable with that, I assure you we're very comfortable with that, and we'll return as appropriate.
Will you need?
Approve or approve.
Condition on the fact that you're going to.
Everything's okay. We
approve.
scrutinize it. We're happy to approve bills that are appropriate.
Will you
Because-
need to come back, or can you take authorization from 1 and 2, I guess? Is that enough?
I think a contract amendment is needed encompassing the
two.
new.
1 and 2 are necessary. The actions on 1 and 2 are definitely necessary. Ken, with respect to
'Cause it's- I
once
don't-
we receive the bills and those with which we are comfortable paying, do you need anything procedurally from the city council other than what they're doing tonight?
Because let me say this, the recommended actions, both for council and the board, don't have a specific amount in them. So, I mean, but yet, the detail is in the memo you've provided. I'm just uncomfortable approving a specific dollar amount. If you can go and review the bills and you deem them appropriate, and our staff deems them appropriate, I'm okay with paying them for work that we've authorized. And that's an important distinction also.
So we could make the motion to adopt 1 and 2, and the third, the third would be recommend to our city manager that you would review all bills, and if they're consistent with what is being requested, that you'll pay them. Because, we don't sit here and review bills for any of our
Right.
attorneys. We never micromanage that. So I think that's why we need our staff, when you bring a proposal to us, that we know that you've gotten the bills and that what's being recommended you're supporting before it should be on the council agenda. So with that, I think that would be a modification to item 3. And then with that, let me turn this to Director Choi.
Yeah, the number 3, what I read is that the recommend the city council consider Aleshire and Wynder's request for reimbursement in an amount deemed appropriate for additional costs incurred prior to March 24th, 2015, City Council authorization to perform research and prepare the preliminary drafts for closed session analysis. So this one does not, even though in the executive summary it does say it's requesting 80,000, but in the approval recommendation is deemed appropriate. What I want to clarify is that our special attorney and an HSNO CPA firm were given specific dollar amount to perform our forensic audit. And the final audit was completed and presented on March 24th. And subsequently, there were a series of events took place and still going on. And I anticipate a lot more legal fees will be incurred due to the council decision today extending or requesting tolling agreements, and after that and then also to find experienced another attorney firm to evaluate more objectively whether we're going to proceed for the another course of legal actions, etc. So I do anticipate there will be presumably a lot more legal cost will be incurred above and beyond up to today's work. This is the amount the city council, city manager got the indication from the amount of work the attorney firm has done, and then also unanticipated state joint committee on legislative audit committee asked us to appear. The letter was addressed to me, so I had to appear with my attorney. Those kind of anticipation of extra cost wasn't not anticipated. I mean, the actual things, just day by day, things are happening. So this is, I think we try to make sure all the legal steps we are taking is presented, and all the legal steps will incur unavoidably the cost, and attorneys will have to be paid. So this is the anticipated amount, the 80,000, and then this is up to today. But furthermore, I'm telling our colleagues that we need to anticipate the legal actions post forensic audit report. So I don't think we need to be concerned about what the line items there were, and then obviously when the bill is prepared and presented, and then our accounting department will review line by line, and that's their job. And like board member Chairperson Shea is speaking about, in my memory, no specific invoice I examined. We do get all the expenditure reports on a weekly basis. So I think this is a very appropriate step that we are right now taking tonight.
Okay, are there any other comments? Yes, our city attorney.
Briefly, Chairwoman, and I think I heard this in Director Lalaway's statements, but it would be an authorization of an up to the $80,000 in
Yes.
compliance with the Measure V after the bills have been reviewed by the city manager and staff for appropriateness.
And if there is a conflict, I mean, if we have a disagreement, that's the time we would want to bring this back have a discussion, and we could vote on that. But historically, we don't micromanage billings here, and if we weren't ready for that, maybe I would have suggested we should have waited a week or so and brought it back. But since we didn't, I think we just should allow them to make that determination up to the 80,000. If you get billings, Ken, that are not something you feel comfortable with, then bring it back to the board.
Why do we need up to 80,000? Can't we say as appropriate?
Well, it could be 90,000, right?
It could be. I just was concerned that the language in Measure V talks about budget adjustments and approvals, and I thought in the abstract, without there being some dollar amount, someone could argue that was problematic under the transparency ordinance. So that was my desire for an actual number. But if you wanted to increase that number or to have a different number, that would be appropriate as well.
Do we need a number? Can't we say as appropriate?
The budget for the effort provided by Aleshire and Wynders.
There you are. Say that again?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. The budget for the effort provided to us by Aleshire and Wynder was $80,000.
And? Is there
That's the number. That's the.
No, I know. But do we need a number, though?
Well, for an up to $80,000 with the Measure V requirement, we would need authorization up to that amount.
You're opining based on Measure V that we need a dollar amount?
It's an increase to the it would potentially be an increase to the contract for that amount.
Sean, just to direct, I mean,
Sean,
this is...
City Manager
this
Sean
is-
Joyce.
Just Sean, but the reason it's before you is because of, if nothing else, and again, I think one can argue sections A and B also apply to Section 4, but which, the reason we are here is the clause that says, for so long as the Orange County Great Park Corporation continues to exist, prior to approving any change that would increase spending on or for the benefit of the Orange County Great Park, the city shall receive a recommendation with regard to such increase from the Orange County Great Park Corporation Board of Directors. I will attest that I believe that all of the work done was appropriate. But even if I think that's appropriate, my interpretation of this language, and I'm not really, I don't feel confused by it, requires that we present it to you, and that's the reason that it's on tonight's agenda.
Okay, the work authorized and the bills submitted are two separate things, and that's my point. They're two separate items. I agree. He should be paid, they should be paid for what was authorized. But I don't have any evidence in front of me that the bills submitted are what's authorized. I don't need to spend all day on this, but if you need a number, I'm happy to give you a number. If you tell me we can do as appropriate, then I'm happy to do as appropriate, whatever you feel is necessary.
Well, that's what our staff report says. It's deemed appropriate, so.
Right, there's no dollar amount in here. That's my point.
Understood, and I'm tearing off of what Ken said about what the proposed number was. I just feel under the transparency ordinance, a number showing what the maximum amount would be as authorized by the city council.
But that's not your recommended actions that I guess Eric and Sean have drafted.
Fair enough.
The city attorney didn't draft it, but our staff did. But again, let's, we've got a lot before us. I don't think we should haggle over some bills. The point is that our staff is very good at overseeing this. If you feel that there's anything within the billings or the final billings that are submitted that have a problem, bring them back to this board, and we won't approve them if they're not appropriate. So, again, yes, I'm sorry.
just had one more
Director
question.
Krog, did you have something to say?
I did. I was advised some time ago that all of the bills had not been received, and I just wanted to know if this action is passed this evening, and again, I don't plan to support it, but assuming that it's passed, does this represent a complete closeout of all outstanding bills associated with the audit?
Sean, yeah, if you could answer that. The one thing I'd like to know is, I don't know why some board members are hearing that bills aren't coming in when we never talk about this. Bills don't come in, and we're told about individual bills. So I'm concerned why people are being told this information and others are not getting that information. So we got to try to have a little bit seamless
Well,
process
maybe
here
we
that would work
ask.
a
I
little
don't
bit
know.
better. So.
If a council member asks me a question, I answer the question. With respect to Mr. Taylor, I would invite him to speak to whether or not this represents the final invoice and final consideration for payment.
Up to today, right?
Up to the audit point, right?
There are, and thank you, Mr. Joyce, and again, chairperson and members of the board. There are two other categories in terms of the Aleshire and Wynder bills that we're currently processing. We don't submit bills to the city without approval. That's why we're waiting on this item. The other items we're looking at is there were a series.
Wait, can you say that again? You don't submit bills until they're approved?
We don't submit bills until there's a budget approval. So when the budget approval is given by the city for a certain amount, in this case $80,000, we would then be able to submit our bills for payment. Those get reviewed carefully by staff. They get brought back, as I understand it, on the city council's warrant register, and that's the process that it typically goes through, a lot of checks and balances. But there's two other categories that aren't directly related to the audit report itself. To answer the question from Board Member Crom, there were a very high number of Public Records Act requests that came in after the December budget adjustment. Those are still being itemized. It was a very heavy burden, and we don't have an itemization. That's typically a function that would be performed by a city attorney. Our view would be it should probably be coming out of a different budget, but that's ultimately up to the city staff. I don't see it as a great park function. It's a City of Irvine Public Records Act function. The other category that we dealt with is the entity GAFCON did submit to the city at the end of December an evidence preservation and electronic record demand, a very expensive and costly demand that's put a tremendous amount of burden on city staff that required our involvement on an emergency basis. So there were some fees related to that. Again, it had nothing to do with the Great Park directly or the audit report itself. It's a separate category that we're finishing up itemizing those amounts. So those are the two other categories that we're wrestling with that are not part of the action item this evening, which is focused on the issues that were discussed in the March approval by the council.
Was our staff working with you? Staff, are you working with him to understand what these costs would be, these extraordinary costs above what was approved?
I think the burden's first on us. I mean, we're still wrestling with trying to itemize all of that, and then we would discuss it with Mr. Joyce and his fine staff.
Okay.
And then that's something that would go before you when it's ready, but it's unfortunately not ready. There is a lag time, just so the council knows, between the time we actually do the work and the time we get the bills internally and process them. There's an internal lag time in any organization, any law firm. There is a delay there, and that's some of what you're seeing here.
Mrs. Chair, just one more question. Ms. Chair, just one more question related to that is, one, you know, the action that the City Council made earlier this evening that was announced out by our city manager asked that those funds come out of our city general fund. Our city manager indicated the reason that this is coming before us in a joint meeting is because of the measure that was passed in November and because it involves an expenditure. But it also, that language cites something that's done for the benefit of the Great Park. And in fact, whatever happens here, there's no direct benefit to the Great Park by it. It's an action that was taken by the City Council. And I'm wondering why any of the money for the audit or anything else was coming out of Great Park Fund 180, which is there for the development of Great Park, and not out of the City General Fund, since the interests that seem to be the subject of our focus here seem to be city interests. The recommendations are for the city to take action on behalf of the city's interests. So I'm also interested in that, because if I hear Mr. Taylor correct, there probably are going to be more billings that are going to come through, and those are, you know, presumably going to come through 180 unless we direct something different. But I'm trying to understand why any of this is being paid for by Great Park funds, if in fact going forward it's going to come out of the city's general fund.
Well, I appreciate that. It's a good point, because in December when we approved that contract, we didn't have this before the Great Park Board, so I found this whole thing confusing when the report came out to me the other day. So anyway, we're going to have to kind of get some clarity on just how we process this, because I don't want to spend much more time on this. Yes?
Just a small point, and thank you for the opportunity to make it. The action tonight and the recommendation for tonight, and the action that you would be taking as I hear you contemplating it, is not to pay bills. It's to authorize the contract expenditure. So we'll watch the bills, we'll scrutinize them as we always do, but what I need tonight, again, it's pursuant to Measure V, and that's the only reason that we're here.
What do you mean it's not to pay bills?
It's
Isn't
to
that
authorize
contract?
the payment of the bills. There are no bills submitted, and therefore neither you nor I are being asked nor authorized to pay them. It's to be in a position to be able to do so upon receipt and scrutiny.
But let me ask you this. We see bills, literally the bills for each individual vendor, contractor, consultant through I guess
Well, we see
The
warrant
warrant register.
what? Through the
The
warrant
register, right.
And so, but we're not going to see that here. Is that what you're saying?
You'll end up seeing them as you always do. So they would come from the firm, they'd go to Ken's group in finance, I'm normally involved in them, and then you would see, once he checks them off, everybody's good, you'll see them on the warrant list as you ordinarily
2 to
would.
4
Nothing
weeks.
would be
Total amount, not individual items. Who drafted this Measure V? This thing's awful.
I think you did. I think you did. Okay, well, with that, we do have a motion, a recommendation for our board, and it's items 1, 2, and 3. And
And I second.
and you seconded it. Okay, so who?
Who made the
Oh,
motion?
I'll make the motion.
You made the motion,
Okay, I'll
I
make the motion.
seconded.
Second. Any further discussion? Please vote.
Motion carries 3-1. Board Member Crum opposed and Board Member Schott absent.
Now, I apologize.